Hi everyone, could we just make a start please? We are running a little bit behind time. Welcome back, hope you all had a good break. So we're now going to move on to the second session of the conference, which is looking at advertising and sponsorship of HFSS food, and we'll consider the public health impacts and responses to this. I'd now like to introduce the chair for the session, who is Professor Simon Capewell. Professor Capewell is Emeritus Professor of Public Health at the University of Liverpool and is a member of Obesity Action Scotland Steering Group. Professor Capewell has worked in public health for over 3 decades, teaching and advising on policy and researching the epidemiology and prevention of non-communicable disease, including studies on inequalities, tobacco, alcohol, inactivity and, crucially, obesity and poor diet. So, Professor Capewell, over to you to take you through the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Jennifer. Simon Capewell, and thanks for coming back in. I'm sorry the coffee break was a bit rushed. This is a bit of scheduling that we can improve on next time. So before the break, we were hearing about promotions and the good work that's being done and the lessons, crucial lessons to learn from England in terms of definitions and plugging loopholes and putting something into the regulations about review within 5 years. This session is going to be focusing more on advertising and sponsorship. We're going to be looking at what, and really the parallels with tobacco are so very obvious. The lessons from tobacco around nailing affordability, accessibility and acceptability, the 3 A's, are just so important. So we're going to hear about what the industry has been doing in terms of the sports setting. We're going to be getting some wisdom from lessons from England about what has been happening and not happening in terms of outdoor advertising policies. And then we're going to be reminded about how important it is from the future of youth and how we need to invest in the future, because it is our children's, our grandchildren's future, which will be the young person's perspective. So I'd like to kick off with Robin Ireland, who's a friend and a colleague for some 25 years. Robin and I worked together for a long time on a charity called Heart of Mersey, and which is now called Hague. Right. Go. So we got a video.
Sorry about that. So I should just play on the next slide.
To the end.
I'm Leon and my favourite food is fish.
Fish. It's a good one.
It's
an acquired taste.
I'm Jake and I like strawberries.
Strawberries. Yum.
I'm Nadia and I'll eat anything you give me. Yes to fresh.
Should I give you a couple just now?
I can't.
What do you write that one?
Okay.
Oh, I love that.
Is there dairy in there?
When you were looking at the junk food adverts, what kind of things did you notice?
That on the adverts wasn't really what was on the product, and they used like different materials from what the real version was. They were colourful and meant to bribe people into buying them, even though they aren't like that when they actually buy them. They're just kind of crap.
They use it to get from McDonald's supplies.
Yeah, probably.
Oh.
They had the flavour that it is all over it, and they had the actual like product in it all over it, and like the main colours of it.
They like enhanced some of the like details and like made them really like yummy, and like the colors like really bright and really shiny.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, do you have like pizza paper like
Maybe, yeah.
The limited edition and buy one get one free.
Those are really
I
good
did
ones.
see the limited edition.
Favorite foods. I really like the stuff on your phone.
Yeah, run with stadium.
Half 29.
I thought that was the symbol for Scottish rugby.
So when you were making your new advert for the healthy food, what kind of things did you put in it to make it more appealing?
We put in like only bright colours. We put in blue, red, and green.
You wanted to draw it?
Making it space themed and making it more appealing to like the space lovers, like colors and like bright colors and like stuff to show how it is actually real and it's not fake. You want a glass of milk?
I don't think I like soy milk.
We have a rare strawberry, limited, and super rare. 1 in 1,000. Really rare. We even have a slogan. Love them, get them.
Intergalactic grapes. Grapes that we found on a ship that crashed into our...
They can live in the grape.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well
Eat
done.
grapes. I have a question.
The collab is Cristiano Ronaldo.
There's a healthy cereal first, and then you eat the unhealthy cereal, but it's still healthy because it's got blueberries and grapes. It's milk plus cereal, soya. The milk is soya. One of the 3 CR7 autographs is in this one.
Okay, so you're using that to try and get people to buy more of it. Okay, Lily, what do you have to say about your advert?
Eat your fruits.
Eat your fruit. So this is
If you were to give children a message about eating healthy or junk food adverts, what do you think you would say?
To not eat a lot of junk food.
Eat more healthy stuff.
I think that's a
Don't
good
always eat the like junk food that you see on like.
Don't
The adverts trick you. Eat healthy.
good job.
Right, thank you very much for that. And that's a good guide. You never share the stage with children or animals. And also, the kids cut straight to it. They don't talk about HFSS. They talk about junk food. And this is what we need to do with our communications. So without more ado, Robin Ireland, the floor is yours. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks very much, Simon. Yeah, that was excellent, wasn't it? And what came up in that? I noticed Scottish rugby, I noticed Cristiano Ronaldo, and I noticed McDonald's, and at least 1 or 2 of those are going to get mentioned in my talk. Okay, just quickly, who considers themselves a sports fan? Put your hands up. In public health terms, that's not bad. It's about half the audience. Normally it's even lower. And that's the point. I have to say, I worked in public health most of my life, and I love football. I'm a big football fan. I hardly ever find it was great to hear Jenny Minto saying she was an Aberdeen fan. I've made a note of that. It's always useful to know. But we don't take sport seriously, do we? It gets a free ride. And when the kids were talking about advertising then, they were talking about the kind of ads that come up on their screens and social media and so on. Sport is a living advertisement, often for the most unhealthy things. It's covered on shirts, it's in the background, it's on the ads as you watch it, and yet we don't talk about it, and it will not be covered in the new legislation that's coming out that was talked earlier. So I just flashed this up because we can get a little bit technical sometimes about commercial determinants of health, but here's a very simple definition. Commercial companies use a range of strategies and other approaches to promote products and choices that affect human and environmental health, defined as the commercial determinants of health. And sport is part of that mechanism. I've studied this a lot, partly because I'm a sports fan and partly because it's always really upset me that sport is used to promote pretty much everything that's unhealthy. And it's a very effective mechanism. Arguably, the tobacco and alcohol industries invented sports sponsorship, which is quite interesting in itself. Now, I don't know if you remember Dion's slide for earlier. She showed the different legislation that impacted upon tobacco use. And you may remember in the slide it said tobacco advertising was banned on British television in 1965. So how come we had cricket, darts, snooker covering our TV screens after that? Because again, sport got a free ride. It wasn't covered in that legislation. And at the same time, the football authorities did their best to keep women's football out of the picture for about 50 years. And when women's football came back in, this is a picture of the England women's captain in, I think, about 1974. And who's sponsoring the trophy? Martini and Rossi. Alcohol and tobacco have always been there. But we also, I should also say, incidentally, for those sociologists, historians and so on will know what also happened in the 1970s when sport was getting colonised by alcohol and tobacco industry. That's when we all got TVs. That's how we consume sport, as TV consumers. There's the money, follow the money. That's what finances sport now. But Coca-Cola also had a long history of using sports to promote its sugary drink. This is the Amsterdam Olympics in 1928. So they've had nearly 100 years of being associated with the Olympics. So why do we have sport wanting to associate? So, well, the kids probably already came up with it, actually. It's exciting. It's glamorous. It's unpredictable. If anybody watched the Wales game on football last night, nobody would have predicted that. It appeals to young people, and it gets huge major screen exposure. Not just the 20,000 people that might be in a stadium. You're talking about hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people watching on TV. Sport provides a health halo. It enables brands and products to be associated with healthy lifestyles. And as I've already said, it's historically provided a mechanism for unhealthy brands to avoid controls on advertising and other media. The tobacco industry managed it for a very long time. But exactly as the tobacco industry promoted its mentholated and filtered products, saying that they were safer, which of course they weren't, we now see that the alcohol industry and the food industry hiding behind the kind of advertising which focuses upon their low alcoholic products or their low sugar alternatives. They're promoting the brand. It's the brand. The kids said it, didn't they? And what did the kids say? They talked about colours, and I'm going to talk about 3 brands in a very short time and how they're associated with sport. But the first thing I just point out, look at those colours. They know what they're doing, don't they? Those appeal to kids. So, it's tricky, isn't it? A lot of us are parents, a lot of us will have young kids, and you want your kids to be involved in sport. Of course you do. It's healthy. You want to get them out there. Who's been supporting youth football for the last 15 years across the UK? McDonald's. And I don't know how you get around this sometimes. It's difficult. I'm not going to come with easy answers here, because if you're in community sport, it's really hard to get the money. We really do need to see and try and how to address this, but it's really serious. I recommend that BMJ article, which is referenced here. McDonald's appealed against, this was actually Mansfield Council, they appealed against the rejection of a new fast food outlet, and they appealed against it on the basis they promoted health and fitness. And you're going, what? Seriously? And one of the examples was they sponsored a young people's football team. It's so cynical, I'm sorry. And that picture came from the local press. That's the way companies like McDonald's work. That's commercial determinants of health. Example number 2, Red Bull. There's an age thing here, actually. I'm not going to embarrass anybody in the audience to say who drinks Red Bull every now and then, but I'm of an age when I went to school and I did my exams and I did sport, I didn't have energy drinks. Where the hell did they come from? It was an invented audience, a completely invented product. And the maker of Red Bull, when it was brought on the market in 1987, knew there wasn't a market, and he said, we need to invent it. And their whole marketing has been associated with risky sports which appeal to teens and young adults. I'm not blaming the youth football team in the last slide, and neither am I blaming Danny McCaskill, who, incidentally, I love cycling. Have you ever seen his videos? Oh my God, this man has talent. Who's he sponsored by? Red Bull. Danny, bless him, he's got brilliant skills. He's become a millionaire on it. I'd rather he got his money from elsewhere, and I'm not criticising him, because if you're going to get the money out there, you're going to take it, aren't you? And their whole slogan, Red Bull gives you wings. What a load of... And they got away with it. They've got away with it. It's been challenged. I mean, Red Bull has less caffeine than a cup of coffee. Obviously, standard size, whatever. And it's also full of sugar. And it clearly isn't good for you. I hope I don't have to argue the case of why sugary drinks and McDonald's, generally speaking, are not good for you. And yet, this is superb marketing, isn't it? The company have persuaded millions of young consumers, Gen Z, online, brought up with computers and so on. I've done work with Bite Back, going back a wee bit, where they looked at the kind of advertising that went out there, and it seemed to be completely normal. And if you're parents with young kids, you'll know that. Kids think they've got to have an energy drink or a sports drink to actually be good at sport. That's invented. That's completely constructed. And it's all part of marketing. And here I am, I'm English, I'm talking about Iron Brew. Oh my goodness me. Well, here's a shop, did you know? It isn't made of iron. Well, there you go. They couldn't call it that now, incidentally. Legislation would prevent that, as far as I understand it, because you can't claim it's made of iron, but they did it a long time ago. There's an awful lot of sugar involved. And hasn't it done well trading on this image? Made in Scotland from girders. And it's called Scotland's other national drink. As an English person living in Glasgow, I'd like to see water, frankly, as our national drink, but there you go. Iron Brew's a long history of sponsoring sports leagues and competition, and I completely recommend reading the report here. I know about to that. Iron Brew owned the Commonwealth Games in 2014. With the marketing they did at the Commonwealth Games in 2014, sales rose by 24.4% throughout the period of the Games. That's what it does. It's increasing consumption. And it isn't just about obesity, is it? We don't have very good teeth in the UK either, and you can put a lot of blame for that on these kind of sugary drinks. A lot of this marketing is about young people, and we saw it in the last video, so well expressed. If in the current Chief Medical Officer of the UK government, if advertising didn't make an effect on people's behaviours, then people or companies wouldn't pay the very large sums they do for it. That's why they do it. Now, I didn't live in Glasgow in 2014. I know we had the Commonwealth Games then. We've got the Commonwealth Games next year. I really hope it's an opportunity to showcase Glasgow, the city where I live, the joys of pleasure in taking part in sport. Or will it be, as I would argue the London Olympics were in 2012, a festival of fast food and sugary drink showcasing Scotland's least healthy brands? Let's see. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robin. So anyone who's old enough can see the parallels with the tobacco industry here. So our next speaker is Fran Bernhardt, and she comes from Sustain. She's the Commercial Determinants Coordinator. Please come on through. And Fran and I go back a little while. She was previously helping with the Children's Food Campaign, which has done an awful lot to raise awareness over the last 10 years or so, demonise sugar and get us to where we are today. So she's now going to give us experiences and lessons from outdoor advertising policies in England, and let's hope we can learn. Fran, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It is brilliant to be here today in Scotland, but more on that in a little bit. So as you said, I'm Fran Bernhardt. I'm Commercial Determinants Coordinator at Sustain. We are the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. We're a very small food policy charity that works across the UK on everything from food poverty through to the impacts of food on climate change, through to the work that I do, which is looking at the commercial determinants of health. And I specialise in supporting governments and other institutions to switch the spotlight away from, oh, you can't see it, hang on, unhealthy food advertising. Oh, hang on a minute. There we go. Unhealthy food and drink advertising like this to healthier food and drinks instead. So back in 2018, I was seconded into the Mayor of London's office to help write and implement what was then the groundbreaking restrictions across the Transport for London estate. So we brought that policy in, the Healthier Food Advertising Policy, back in February 2019. And since then, I've been supporting lots of local, regional, national and international governments to bring in healthier food advertising policies. So we've developed lots of evidence and insights, so much so that I can actually start my presentations with this bold statement: how to reduce obesity, type 2 diabetes and heart disease, as well as address health inequalities and save the NHS money at negligible cost. So let's crack on. So, as has been outlined really clearly here today from the Minister all the way through the previous panel and our former speaker, essentially advertising works, and we're also looking at how this has an increased risk of food-related ill health as well as worsening health inequalities. There is so much evidence out there that the more unhealthy food advertising we're exposed to, the more we purchase, the more we consume, and the higher our risk of food-related ill health. There's also this great paper from Scotland, actually, from a few years ago, which looks at children's journeys to school and shows that children from more deprived neighbourhoods are much more exposed to unhealthy food advertising. So, and this is a pattern that we see across the UK. So what is the Healthier Food Advertising Policy? Essentially, we restrict unhealthy food and drink adverts, and we use the UK government nutrient profiling model to do that. And that is the gold standard model that was developed specifically for looking at childhood obesity within advertising. Draws a really clear line between products we can advertise and products we can't, which is just what we need when it comes to advertising, because you can't kind of half have the advert up or kind of grey it out. It's either up or it's not. And it was developed by experts. It's been in use in the UK since 2007. And it's also been, different versions of it have been copied across the world. So it was kind of setting the standard across the world. And it looks at the nutritional content on a product-by-product basis. So we're weighing up the kind of products, the nutrients of concern, like the energy, saturated fat, sugar, and salt, and weighing that up against the fruit, veg, and nut content, the fibre, and the protein to give us a score and determine if that product is, on the whole, healthier or less healthy. So there has been interest from governments all over the world and the UK in bringing this policy in. And just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, I spend a lot of time taking photos of adverts, as you might imagine. And these are all photos that I've taken from across London. So back in 2018, we were seeing a lot of things like this on the left here. So, ice creams, sweets, chocolates, very unhealthy burgers, milkshakes, etc. The list goes on and on and on. Fast forward to the present, and we're seeing adverts we never thought possible across London. So top right there, you've got an advert for corn on the cob. Bottom left, ginger shot. Above that, you've got one of those recipe boxes with lots of vegetables. And even top left there, McDonald's getting in on the act. So what was the result of all of this? We were really lucky to have an independently funded evaluation of the Transport for London policy. It was funded by the NIHR, and it was carried out by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And they found the policy led to a 20% decrease in sugary purchases. It also led to 1,000 weekly household calories less from unhealthy foods and drinks. So we're seeing Londoners really shift what they're purchasing as a result of this policy. And you can read more about that using that QR code there, and the paper is published in PLOS Medicine. And then we got the University of Sheffield came along and looked at what the impact would be across the London population of that shift. So they modelled the outcomes, and they found the policy would be expected to prevent 100,000 cases of obesity, 3,000 cases of type 2 diabetes, 2,000 cases of heart disease, and ultimately save the NHS £218 million. So a significant change as a result of one policy. So another big question which I'm asked, as you might imagine, I was asked a lot at the time and have been asked a lot since, what happens to the advertising revenues? Because of course the reason why we're advertising really is for the revenues, and I'm pleased to say that across every site that has brought this policy in, the revenues have been maintained. And the reason for that is because companies continued to advertise, but they simply switched the spotlight to healthier products. So this is an example from McDonald's. You can see on the left here, they're advertising a drink, which is, and hopefully I don't need to tell you, an unhealthy drink. It would be restricted under the policy. And so the following summer, after we brought the policy in, they switched that out for a healthier product. And McDonald's is not alone in this. A lot of these companies that we might associate with unhealthy foods and drinks, KFC, Burger King, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, etc., all switch the spotlight towards healthier products instead in order to continue advertising. And this is another example from Just Eat. So often what they do is they'll have a campaign and they'll have a load of different posters they put out. And what we're seeing them do is where we don't have an advertising policy, they're still advertising their unhealthy products. But where we do have an advertising policy, they choose to put the posters of the healthier products. So essentially, if we don't hold them to it, they won't comply, they won't switch to healthier products. So, now you might be wondering why this person from England is coming in here and talking to you about stuff that's going on in England. Hopefully, this map gives you a good answer to that. So we are seeing a lot of momentum across England on this work. So since I helped bring this policy in 2019 across the Transport for London estate, I've been supporting lots of local governments across the UK, but a lot in England. But you'll notice not so much in Scotland. And I would love to think how we could change that. So watch this space and do come and speak to me afterwards if you want to know more and do something about that. So far I've told you all the good news about the policy, and I'm afraid there is a little bit of bad news. So despite all the precedent, all of the evidence, all of these successful policies, we are still, to this day, seeing so much lobbying against these policies. And that's both, when I was working in City Hall, when, Transport for London was bringing in the policy, we had significant lobbying. And more recently, we actually made the front page of the BMJ with this investigation, which I've been working with them on for the past 3 years or so, which uncovered lots of the lobbying that the advertising industry is doing against local governments trying to bring this policy in. There's also been some really interesting evidence showing the way in which the press are using the sorts of lines that industry is putting out in order to undermine the policies as well, despite all of this good news. So just to give you some quick examples of that, we're seeing lots of kind of propaganda pieces that come out to try and dissuade policymakers away from bringing these policies in. This is an example from Outsmart, which represents all the outdoor advertising companies. They've also got these industry-funded think tanks, which branded all of the peer-reviewed academic literature as junk science a little while back. So we need to be really strategic when we're looking at these policies. I've said governments here, but really this could be any institution that has an advertising estate or in future might have an advertising estate. We need to really carefully navigate around lobbying, and it's a tough balance. As with any policy, you need to gather support, but also with this, we need to really maintain discretion. Please don't reinvent the wheel, follow good practice, otherwise we're really looking at minimal changes to advertising at best. So very quickly, we do have a lot of resources. As I say, I've been doing this for a number of years now, so we've released a toolkit. We have a website with all sorts of case studies, all the latest news, standards of what good looks like, that map that I showed you before, all the evidence. And also, I'm funded to support Scotland, so we can actually do something on this. So in summary, healthy food advertising policies are a really powerful tool. We have a precedent of over 6 years. There is so much evidence of the policies. We're really lucky, actually, to have all this evidence that these policies are leading to a reduction in food-related ill health, but also that advertising revenues have been maintained. And that's because no brand is banned. They're simply switching the spotlight away from unhealthy products. But this needs to be really robust because we face very strong opposition. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Fran, and thanks for keeping to time. So, yes, tobacco tactics, using successful mechanisms to control tobacco, applying them to junk food. I think we're getting quite a theme here. So last but not least in this session, we have the youth voice. So please come on up, Ryan. So Ryan McShane is quite young, but he's been doing these sorts of gigs for more than a decade, he tells me. It's just great to get a young person's perspective on advertising and sponsorship of junk food. So, Ryan, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thanks for inviting me along today. As has just been said, it does say young food ambassador up there, or I think it did in the brief. I'm 23 years old, and it does feel like I've been doing this for a long time. And in all honesty, it started in 2014. I had just celebrated the 3-year anniversary of coming into the Forster placement that I'm currently in, which is a rarity still, but I'll come on to that in a second. But the reason why I recognised that I had to get involved in the political system and I recognised that I had to start speaking up was because I had lived in poverty for the first 9 years of my life. I'd actually grown up just about 1.5 miles away from here on the south banks of the Clyde, in the Gorbals. Some of you will know the area really well. And again, it was going through a change, you know, it was going through a revitalisation, some would say. Some would call it regeneration, I would call it revitalisation. But there was still the effects of the decades that had gone before it, you know, the deindustrialisation of the Clyde, you know, Red Clydeside had disappeared. And for me, I had recognised that there was still poverty going on in the area, and I was experiencing it. And 3 years after that, there was a bill brought forward to the Scottish Parliament through an inquiry that had been done before that by one of the committees at the Scottish Parliament, and was looking into the outcomes and the experiences of those that were looked after by the state, those that were care experienced. And I had recognised that some of those experiences that those people that were before the committee and the inquiry, I had experienced myself, but not in those 3 years, but the 9 years that had happened from the day I was born. And I was taken in and out of different care placements, but what I had recognised every single time, that there was inequality still in society, and I thought I need to do something about that. And so in 2014, 2015, the bill was passed, you know, implemented. There was new duties on corporate parents, you know, public bodies that had new duties towards care experienced people and with care experienced people. But that wasn't enough for me. And you'll get a sense of that as I go on. There was a call from a beloved organisation of mine, Who Cares Scotland, and I became a member of them the following year once it became a membership organisation. And we had recognised that there was a collective view that we were kind of doing a wee bit more, but not enough. And there had to be a massive review of the care system. And for me, I had led the calls for a review purely because my own experience between 2011 and 2016 at that point had been a loving environment, and I was still hearing stories where that wasn't happening anywhere near as much as it should have been happening. So I called for a big review. The review was launched. It took just over 4 years, which was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, but we knew it had to be root and branch. We knew it had to look at everything. And all through that process, I had recognised that governments were just putting this review on the sideline and going, job's done, you know, we'll have big, massive recommendations that will come and we'll sort of implement them. Government got on with it. And actually that picture that you see up there was, I think, June 2019. And the First Minister, actually at the time, Nicola Sturgeon, had said that, you know, this wasn't just a government review that was going to take place and everybody was going to be happy about it, that she was going to take, you know, it by the absolute clause and get on with it. And she did, in fairness to her. But that day in particular, she had just announced a massive, you know, policy shift that didn't just allow the review to do that. She got on and done it. And from that experience, that month in particular, in June, I had just left the Scottish Youth Parliament. I had been elected to the Youth Parliament to represent Who Cares Scotland since 2017. And that term in particular, halfway through, it would have been June, July in 2018, and 2018 was the year of young people in Scotland. And I put my head above the parapet again, and the convenership of the Sport and Leisure Committee came up. And I thought the remit was so broad, as you would expect, but there was also a Health and Wellbeing Committee at the time as well. And I was fighting like mad for both committees not to be merged. You know, we knew that we had to get on with a job of work in the Sport and Leisure Committee. And part of the remit was health inequalities. And at the time, the Future Food Inquiry was ongoing, ably co-chaired, I think, by the former Children and Young People's Commissioner, Bruce Adamson in Scotland. And again, part of the campaigning around that was young people's rights and the right to food. And at the parliamentary reception after the inquiry had concluded, I was asked by the Food Foundation if I would become a right to food ambassador for them, hence why I'm partly here today. But the work from 2019 to this current day by the Food Foundation and its ambassadors is incredible. If you ever get the chance to meet one of them, and I am one of them, but I'm speaking on behalf of them today, is that they have such a breadth of knowledge and experience. I thought my experience was a lot, but it's not until you honestly have the time to listen and genuinely take in what they say, it's incredible. Even just yesterday, a fellow speaker of mine, a colleague of mine, Dev Sharma, some of you will know him, has just been elected as a youth ambassador to UNICEF for the UK. So a pretty big role that I know he'll take up with every fibre in his body. But for me, the issue of high fats, salts and sugars is really pertinent. I was undernourished, when I went into this current foster placement when I was 9. And partly it was mainly because I knew that the food was there available. I was just on the cusp of the free school meals eligibility at the time in Glasgow City Council, but I didn't actually know what was on the plate most of the time. I wasn't educated on what it meant. Why was that potato next to the carrot, or why was the carrot covered in gravy, or why there was a steak pie in front of me, But I was so eager, and the previous speaker spoke about sport. I was an aspiring goalkeeper at the time, and we still had a red ash pitch outside, and every young boy in that class in primary 4 up to 7 wanted to go out and play football, in their lunch break, so they weren't really wanting to eat. They were eating a few spoonfuls and then going out and wanting to play. But for me, I really wanted to just try and sit down and understand what was on the plate. And I couldn't, but I was actually really hungry. And for me, what I've often taken from it is actually the school environment, for me, purely because of all the adverse childhood experiences that were happening inside the family home, is that school was actually an escape, from the chaos that was happening in the house. But then when I got to school, I couldn't actually learn because I was too hungry to learn. And I couldn't put a pen to the paper, I couldn't read a book. And actually, a lot of the time, just to cope, I was creating low-level disruption. So it was just this constant snowball effect of, if other people were hurting me, I was hurting other people. And it was an awful, awful thing. The more I've reflected on it, the older I've got. But I just wanted to highlight the process and how I've gone about interacting with the other food ambassadors on, HFSS topics and, a good food nation and a national food strategy that's currently being worked on again after the previous one, which I thought was really good work done by Henry Dimbleby and the food ambassadors and other folks in the sector, was an approach that worked for me. And I call it the PPE approach. Folks will remember PPE in the pandemic was get your mask on, or you can't enter the room. So I use it because it sums up 3 main points for me: people, place, and expectation. The first people point, growing up in Glasgow, there was people all around me. I had a massive extended family. You had to travel by foot or bike by most places. But for me, as I've grown up and been involved in policy making across the last 11 years and delivery and changing the law and regulations, some of those regulations you heard earlier on, I study law, going into third year, and I think to myself, that is a loophole that needs some work done to it. But for me, it's all about how you gather people together, and really recognise the worth of their voice and what they can do to a movement. The second P is about prevent, but also places. We talk often about postcode lotteries, and we talk about, Fran said it perfectly earlier around, why is an English person just here at a Scottish conference? She's wanting to work with people in different places, and in the last 4 years I've been able to work internationally with colleagues similar age to me, but across the globe, who call themselves collectively Act for Food. And basically it's about how the food system globally contributes to climate change. And I think the stat that I remember reading around 2021, 2022 was, the food systems globally contribute to 1/3 of climate, emissions, carbon emissions. That's scary to think about. But our youth of today know about that, and they're actively wanting to go out and change it. And I go back to the people point, some of the best conversations that you have with young people are with the older generations who are trying to naysay them and say climate change isn't really happening and the food systems don't have a part to play in it. And the E part of it, PPE, is about the balance between experience and expectation. And the food ambassadors at Food Foundation are so good for this. They know they have the experience of, their own experience of, food deserts, food insecurity, food poverty, the food system constantly acting against them in terms of junk food advertising. But then they also know an expectation is there on what they can do, but also what government and local government can do. I don't want to get too bogged down, and I know the stats have been quite horrific so far today, and I want to end in a really good note, in that there is lots of good work happening across the UK and globally, But right now, there seems to be, and this will resonate with folks in the room, there seems to be a real mixed messaging of what is going to happen or what's not happening. And the delay last week, the week before, was gut-wrenching for me and the rest of the Food Foundation ambassadors. And I just thought, we're doing so much good things on one hand, but then we're taken away by the other hand. And it's like, if we want to make progress, we can't just keep expecting people to accept the norm of things being bad. So I'll end on the last note, and it's a quote that I remember seeing about 6 weeks ago, and I think it was the King's Trust. We had a meeting, and it says, to see young people go after their dreams and realise their true potential is incredibly rewarding. That's what I've lived by the last 11 years. I hope you all do too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. It's fabulous. So encouraging to know that we're doing the right thing. And such a challenge for us to know that there's a long way to go. And young people in particular are not impressed by the bullshit that comes out of a lot of politicians. We've got time for a couple of questions before the next session. So please do say who you are, and you've got a microphone there.
Hi, Lynn Rush, NHS Ayrshire and Arden. Thanks to all the panel speakers. My question is, so a lot of the language we use when talking about HFSS foods is quite polarised, so in terms of healthy versus unhealthy, which obviously is necessary when communicating with policymakers and industry. I guess my question is, how do you think we can best reconcile that with communicating with people at an individual level in a way that's realistic and promotes a healthy relationship with food?
Who wants to do that one?
I think it's a really good question. I suppose there's a difference between the sorts of categorisation that we need in order to bring in a policy. So as I said in my presentation, the kinds of categorisation that we need in order to bring in an advertising policy is different from perhaps how we would be talking about this to the public in terms of the sorts of messaging we need to put out there. So I think there is that nuance because everyone needs to eat at the end of the day, but not everyone needs to understand the difference between HFSS and non-HFSS. So I think there are ways in which we would have this conversation among this crowd versus how we might talk about it in dietary recommendations and guidelines, for example.
Okay, anybody else got any questions? Okay, so we are pressed for time. Oh, sorry. Yes, please say who you are.
Hi, Ife Wakanu from Intelli Digest, also a champion for the AFN Network Plus. I just wanted to follow up what you said about how you present it in dietary prescription, or just to if you can throw a little bit more light on what that looks like when you're providing that information to general public on dietary requirements. Please, thank you.
So clearer messaging to the public on what is a healthy diet and what does junk food look like.
I'm going to answer the question again, but others please do step in. I think, I'm no expert on dietary, recommendations for the public, but I think there's, like we said before, that we need to be taking a whole systems approach here. So there's what the individual needs to understand, but actually we need to make it easier for everyone to be able to access healthier and sustainable food. So actually we need to be looking at how we change that wider environment, which is where we need to be looking at those sorts of categorizations that we might be talking about in kind of policy rooms versus the individual having to understand that on an individual level, because of course we can't have everybody having to go and study all of this to the level that we're all talking about it now, but everyone needs to eat healthily. But I don't know if anybody else wanted to talk a bit more about the dietary recommendations.
No, I'm going to say exactly the same thing. I think we're obviously in this room there are a lot of people with a lot of expertise around dietary requirements and so on, but to the public, we probably overcomplicate it. And today is all about promoting healthier environments and making it easier for people to access food. And sometimes what is needed to be done to do that is going to happen at Scottish Government level or some of the organisations here. But what we really obviously wanted is a situation where people in a local area can simply get healthier food. That's what's being promoted and that's what they can afford. And a lot has got to change to be able to get that, as from what we've already heard and seen today.
Yeah, Ryan, can I ask you, most kids coming out of care, do you think they recognise a table with healthy food on? Do they think they recognise a table with junk food on, or do you think they have difficulties?
I think they do have difficulties. I think that there's so many pressures on them already, and the stigma around being, you know, a care leaver, so to speak. But we've gradually moved away from the language of a care leaver, but knowing that the care experience is lifelong, and that, you know, we often see the generational impacts of a lot of these issues. You know, so if it is, you know, lung health, I've got asthma, you know, and it was purely because most, you know, environments I was in, there was, you know, passive smoke around, you know. So for me, I know that's going to be lifelong, and if I have children growing up, that they'll grow up knowing that, you know, I'm a role model in the sense that, you know, that I would have taken choices not to be like the previous generations that were before me. So it goes back to, you know, the general point I was making in my contribution, in that, you know, we want to have a preventative approach, but, you know that we can battle the stigma that is there, you know, knowing that there is so many competing demands in the world, and that, you know, ultimately we have to reduce the amount of health inequalities that we have in society.
Thank you. Absolutely. So again, it's lessons from tobacco. There is no tobacco advertising or promotion in this country. That's the way we should be going for junk food, so that our children grow up in a healthy environment, and so that the messages, the teaching from teachers at school, primary school and secondary school, is not being undermined. Parents purchasing in supermarkets then are not being nagged by their kids to buy junk food and sugary drinks. I think it's time to move on to the next session, but before we do that, can we thank our fantastic speakers.